being able to have a visual figure of even just a fraction of how awesome Jesus is with Valjean, and just his whole interaction with Fantine, or is it Fontaine? Fontaine.
Josh, I think the French would roast you at the stake because of your butchering of their names.
Yeah, I'm thankful they're across an ocean right now. That's it.
They can get to you.
Hello there.
Don't have a good day. Have a great day.
Talk to me, Goose.
I'm gonna steal the Declaration of Independence.
Why so serious?
Squirrel! I could do this all day.
Are you watching closely?
Welcome, everybody, to the One-Eyed Film Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Mossberg, and I got Josh and Annika here. Annika is my sister, and she is joining the podcast for the first time, mostly because she's a theater nerd. No, she is heavily into the theater business. She's actually in the what's it called? Costume shop. I was thinking wardrobe, but yes, costume shop at her college, working on designing costumes, which she's really good at. So we're here to talk today about Les Mis, and Josh hopped on for some reason because apparently he likes it too.
I like good movies, and Les Mis is a good movie. I'd say it's top 10 of all time for me. It's a great movie. Also, I want to address the elephant in the room. This is actually a green screen. You could put elephant right there as I say that line. That'd be really funny.
I've been putting you in the office talking headroom. I don't know how that's going to work with the green screen.
I think that's perfect.
You had said something that I actually think is a little controversial. You said Les Mis is one of the top 10 movies of all times. And I think you're highly contested there because it's not the story. I totally agree the story is probably top 10, very high up there. I would like to defer to Annika for saying that the movie is incredible and top tier. And I don't know why. I know there's complications and frustrations, but like, why? Why is it not as highly praised as any other musical, any other movie, any other like version of Les Mis even?
I would argue that you need to go listen to Norm Lewis singing Stars and tell me that is in any way on the same plane as Russell Crowe being offbeat for half of the movie. I think Les Mis, the movie, is on the better side of movie adaptations of musicals, especially because they took some Broadway stars and actually included them in the cast, like Samantha Barks, who plays Eponine, and Aaron Tveit, who plays Enjolras, are actually consistent theatrical workers. And I think that you can definitely see that difference in quality. While Anne Hathaway and Hugh Jackman and Eddie, whatever his last name is, they're all very talented singers. The music in Les Mis is so difficult because it's so well written that I think you can definitely tell the difference between people who were trained to sing music like that and people who haven't been trained to sing music like that. And I've seen a number of the in-concert films. There's a lot of different anniversary casts who have filmed a concert version of the musical. And I would argue that any of those are better than the movie, except for the one where Nick Jonas is playing Marius.
Nick Jonas?
Yeah.
All right.
It's bad.
So you have a problem with the casting of the movie, or not even the casting. You really have it against Russell Crowe.
Yes, mostly. The other issue is more of just a technical issue, and it's something that all movie musicals struggle with to a degree, because when you go and you see a musical on stage, there's a higher suspension of disbelief because of it happening live in front of you. When you're in a movie, they need to work harder to convince you that what's going on is real and like that it's believable. And so a lot of times movie musicals have to sort of make a choice whether they're going to sort of acknowledge that everyone's singing or not. And for Les Mis, that's really hard because everyone's singing the entire time. And so I think when it's such an ingrained part of the story, they did a pretty good job at that. But the issue comes in that in wanting to preserve that like sort of authenticity, the director had the actors sing live, take after take after take after take, which isn't usually done when filming movie musicals. They usually lip sync to a backing track that was recorded in a studio. And with that, you have some pros because you get a more authentic sound, quote unquote. But the other problem is where you have Hugh Jackman dehydrated as anything so that he could get that sickly look, singing these huge songs that are like so difficult. And then there's just the art of the music is sacrificed for the art of acting, and I think that's definitely shows in especially Anne Hathaway's performance and Hugh Jackman's performance more toward the beginning, where they're trying to sound too real, and in doing so aren't sounding beautiful and doing then a disservice to the material, in my opinion.
So whereas the movie needs to be like, these people are in France and they are dying of hunger, you don't need to believe that on stage. And so they can be well hydrated, they can be well fed, they don't need to look dehydrated. You understand that it's not going to look real when it's on stage, whereas in a movie they're trying to force that look on them so that they look the part, and therefore it also affects how they sing in some cases.
Yeah, and I think I'm trying to remember, though there's one song that Hugh Jackman sings toward the beginning. It's like one of his first big songs as Jean Valjean, and he had been dehydrating himself like 48 hours or something, because his character was supposed to have just gotten out of prison and been severely malnourished, severely dehydrated. And so he did that to look very vascular and veiny and have his skin look thin and all of that, like very visceral, like, oh, this guy is sick sort of a look. But then he turns around and the director is making him sing his soliloquy like 30 times in a row, which is difficult for anyone. But then you add in the challenge of not having drunk water for like 2 days. And it's gonna sound rough. Like, that's just the reality.
So do you think that, I don't know who the director was, but do you think they didn't know how to do a musical movie or how to do it well because they just were a movie director and that doesn't translate well to doing movie and musical at the same time?
I'm not sure. I don't know who directed it. I'm looking it up right now. Tom Hooper. Don't know who that is. But I think they could have struck a better balance. Like, I like to think of...
He did Cats.
Oh, that makes sense. I think you can strike a better balance. Like, I like to think of The Greatest Showman, and I think, even though I do have some qualms with that movie, I think they did a really beautiful job of kind of finding that balance better, of matching your suspension of disbelief while also making the music beautiful, even in cases where the actresses weren't actually singing. Like Never Enough, that isn't the actual actress singing, she's lip syncing to a whole other person's voice, but yet that scene and that song are so visceral and beautiful and full of emotion that you believe it. And so I think they could have had a much better outcome overall if they would have taken that simple step of just letting the actors sing their best in a studio and then gone back and recorded it like most movie musicals. I just think the idea of singing live is fine as an idea, but an execution for a movie that's as big as Les Mis and for music that's as difficult as Les Mis, they just shouldn't have made that choice, especially just considering the health and safety of their actors' voices.
Yeah,
I think, Annika, you have a much different perspective of this. Me, I just thought, wow, this is a really emotional movie. This is great. And I guess I'm not nearly as critical of it as you are, because you're like in musical. You're on stage singing like the people in Les Mis are. Do you have any musical roles, Annika? I guess I don't know much about like some of the roles you've played.
She played Gertrude in Seussical with almost no voice at all and was amazing. She did really well for almost not being able to talk and still pulling it out. She's in it, man. I'm telling you. She won't say it, but I will.
I actually fully believe that, actually. That's awesome.
I have not had a bunch of like singing roles by myself, but I have been taking voice lessons consistently for about 4 years now. And so through that, I'm obviously not the most experienced person. Like, there's people who've been teaching voice for longer than I've been alive. But even in my experience with being taught and even just learning recently, I mean, we've had some brilliant vocal directors work with us here at University of Northwestern, and some of the greatest vocal directors are the ones who prioritize their actors' health. And it's not a kind of, we'll do it for the art, like sacrifice your forever being able to sing for the art. And I think that's obviously a much, much bigger conversation. But yeah, and I just think, I don't know, Seth, if we want to take the time to listen to Norm Lewis singing Stars, but it's just what I do. It's just so good. And it's one of those things where it's just, I understand that movie musicals kind of need to stunt cast in a certain way so as to appeal to a mass audience. But on the other side of the issue is, or giving integrity to the story and to the beauty of the music. And I mean, it's just such a well-written show. It's so beautiful. And the way that melodies come back in to tell the story, like, it really is just one of the best musicals, I believe, that's ever been written. And I just think that they didn't cast in a way that did justice to the source material.
There, out in the darkness, a fugitive running, fallen from God, fallen from grace. God be my witness, I never shall yield till we come face to face, till we come face to face. He knows his way in the dark, mine is the way of the Lord. Those who follow the path of the righteous shall have their reward. And if they fall as Lucifer fell, the flame, the sword, stars in your multitudes, scarce to be counted, filling the darkness with order and light. You are the sentinels, silent and assured, keeping watch in the night, keeping watch in the night. You know your place in the sky, you hold your course and your aim, and each in your season returns and returns, and is always the same. And if you fall as Lucifer fell, you fall in flames. And so it must be, but so it is written on the doorway to paradise, that those who falter and those who fall must pay the price. Lord, let me find him, that I may see him safe behind the bars. I will never rest till then. This I swear by the stars.
I didn't know I was robbed in Les Mis until now.
The other thing we could
Golly.
watch is Colm Wilkinson singing Bring Him Home is absolutely devastatingly, heartbreakingly beautiful.
I thought Hugh Jackman nailed Bring Him Home.
Oh, he did
And-
not. He absolutely did not.
What? Guys, my bar is like on the ground compared to where Annika's is. Like, geez.
Yeah, I mean, some real talent, and that's a little bit different talent than movie stars who can sing, or even Broadway stars who are brought onto movies. It's. I think Broadway is the best of the best, and we can talk about like which version is the best later, but I want to start talking about the story, because I pitch that Les Mis is one of the best examples of the gospel in a story that is as popular as Les Mis, I would say. And part of it might even be intentional. I don't think it was, but it's definitely a story of redemption and forgiveness that is the core essence of the entire fight between Javert versus Valjean, just their conflict of not Javert feeling like what Valjean has done deserves life, and he needs to hunt him down and everything. And not only does he not forgive Valjean, but then Valjean becomes this such gracious man through being the I believe the mayor of that town initially, but then kind of has a realization of his own as he starts to parent Cosette, and then a boy comes in. Oh no, a boy. And he becomes very protective of her, and then he has a good heart, and just this battle. So what do you guys think of the actual story, regardless of movie or show or 25th anniversary versus 10th anniversary? Like, what do you guys think?
Well, I've read the book. I think it was an abridged version, but
you're
I
a book reader.
have read the book. And it definitely is.
Bad.
It's a very classical book. Like, it is very difficult to read through. It's one of those where Victor Hugo will spend 2 whole like pages describing the cobblestones on this random street in France. And so in that way, it's very difficult to get through. But yeah, I would argue that Les Mis is one of the best classical literature examples of a gospel story, because you have Valjean, who's sort of the Christ figure, and then you have there who's kind of analogous to the Pharisees in Jesus's time. And while we definitely see that Valjean had his failings in life and his shortcomings, you know, he was redeemed from that by the priest who shows him mercy in a way no one else would. And after that point is kind of when he becomes the savior figure of the story, and he changes his life around. And Javert is more rooted in this idea that no one can change, and once a criminal, always a criminal, and that there can be no redemption. And then when he chases Valjean for so many years, as Valjean is bringing hope and joy and light to everyone he encounters. Like, honestly, in the books, Marius is a creep. Like, he sneaks up to Cosette's garden and just looks at her for like days on end. He like goes and she'll go and she'll sit and she'll read. And
That's not Riz.
that's one thing I think the musical fixed, is making an actual love story and not just like sneaking into her garden at night to look at her. Even in that way, and Valjean is scared to let Marius into their lives because he doesn't trust him. He ends up saving Marius because he knows that it's what is going to make his daughter happy and is going to give her a stable life. And so then when he encounters Javert towards the end of the story and he doesn't kill Javert, Javert doesn't know what to do with the mercy that Valjean gave him, because he's never been shown it, and he's never shown it to anyone else. So that's why he ends up, offing himself, because he just doesn't know what to do with grace and mercy and the way that can change a person. And so I think it's really beautiful to see both ends of the spectrum of like this guy who accepted the mercy that was given to him and proceeded to give it to as many other people as he could, compared against this guy who came from a really hard background, grew up and then gained all this power and then refused to show mercy to anyone. And so I think it's just a beautiful illustration of how we need to accept God's grace and mercy, even though we know we don't deserve it. Otherwise, we'll just be living in bitterness for our whole entire lives.
And ideally, we don't jump off a bridge, too. That would be...
Right? If we can't accept it.
Yeah.
That's also, isn't that a difference between the movie and the original story? Is that in the movie is the only one where he goes off a bridge and the other one is a gunshot?
I honestly don't remember how he dies in the books.
Here's my confession. I've only listened to the audio drama.
Here's my confession. Guys, I only watched the movie.
Well, and the audio drama does Eponine so dirty. I mean, personally, she's one of my most favorite characters, but in the audio drama, she just disappears. Like, at least in the movie and the musical, she gets like this like mini redemption arc of trying to save Marius and then failing. That's a side note.
To piggyback off of what you were saying and how like this whole redemption story of Les Mis, that's kind of why I wanted to come on this episode, just because I love when a movie or any sort of story can add an effective redemption arc. But what Les Mis does is it goes a step further, and it has 2 main ones, and then it has one accepting a very pivotal point where the priest gives Valjean like a second chance and gives him mercy. That's a huge turning point there. But then when Valjean ends up giving mercy to Javert, there's both 2 big points there, and I love the contrast of both of them. And I don't know any other story or anything that's given 2 redemption arcs, and one ends up failing because of a lack of ability to accept mercy. And I just think it's beautiful. At least the way that the movie is put it. Annika, you may disagree with that, but I still think story-wise, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's that part of the musical and the original stay very true. The other redemption story that I think is so beautiful is saving Fantine from this life that she's fallen into. And that's kind of the first big place where we see him as kind of becoming the Redeemer figure, like kind of becoming the Christ figure in the story. Is first he becomes this mayor and he runs a very benevolent city and he tries to do the good for the people in the city, but yet there are still people like Fantine who fall through the cracks. And then when he finds her and he pulls her out of her life that she's fallen into, I think that that's so beautiful because it illustrates what Jesus, he's willing to come into the mess that we've made of our own lives. And when you feel like we've dug our hole way too deep and we've lost everything and there's nothing left to give, like he comes in and he brings us out of that, and he gives us love and he gives us care and he gives us healing. And I think that's just one of the most touching parts of the story.
Amen. I was going to say bars, but amen felt a little bit more appropriate here.
I think Valjean kind of turned into the King David figure, and I say that only because I just read in my Bible reading the story of Mephibosheth and his compassion towards his enemy's grandson, I believe it was Jonathan's son, and just being the king and not necessarily having to worry with these peasants, and yet he knows the heart of a king is to be towards the lowliest of the lows, as David. And Valjean also shows that, where he's not better than them just because he is mayor and because he has this power and doesn't need it, and he can delegate somebody to go do that and take care of that person, but he takes time and shows the heart to that person. And I think he's definitely the Christ figure in the story, but he's also the David figure. He's an analogy of David and a man after God's own heart. Not necessarily with those words, but also showing his shortcomings throughout the story and his selfishness with Cosette and other things along the way.
Yeah. The other just visual picture from the story that I think is so beautiful, and it's a much bigger part in the book. I feel like it kind of gets glazed over in other parts of the story, which is sad, but it's where he goes and he gets Marius from the barricade and he trudges him, like he carries him through the sewers, just to get him out and get him to safety. And I think that's also just a beautiful picture of how Jesus came to earth and, dragged us out of the muck and mire of our sin. And like, what was it? In church the other day, Pastor Chris said, something is only ever worth what someone is willing to pay for it. And he's like, think about what Valjean was willing to pay to get Marius to safety for the sake of his daughter, and then think of what Jesus was willing to pay in order to bring us back from our life of sin. So, and that's our worth, is in what Jesus was willing to pay for us, which was everything he had. Yeah. So, yeah.
Amen. I think this is an amen episode today.
Not a bars.
Bars is a chill version of amen. Amen is its full glory.
Amen is full glory. Now, I may not be as passionate about Les Mis as Annika is, but gosh dang it, I am passionate about Jesus, and he's just awesome. And any story that can even kind of portray that, I'm like, that's great. I get so excited just being able to have a visual figure of even just a fraction of how awesome Jesus is with Valjean, and just his whole interaction with Fantine, or is it Fantine? Fantine.
Josh, I think the French would roast you at the stake because of your butchering of their names.
Yeah, I'm thankful they're across an ocean right now. That's it.
They can get to you.
I do have a French squad mate, so let's just hope he's not listening in on this episode right now. But just the whole, we'll go with Hugh Jackman and Anne Hathaway. How about I call him that?
Sure.
Or Annika's gonna start shooting me. There's no winning here for me. So just the whole interaction there between those two characters is just beautiful, and I don't cry for a lot of movies, which is actually probably a lie because I think I ran out of fingers a while ago on the amount of movies I've cried at. But when she gets humiliated with the very uncomfortable situation where she was assaulted, and after that, and then having Valjean come along and just embrace her, and I absolutely love that whole part. Now, Anne Hathaway and Hugh Jackman, I think it did a great job of acting it out because I was sitting in my chair crying when I watched it. So I think it did the story justice in the acting, at least, maybe not the song, but just the way that Jesus comes along and he embraces us with every bit of baggage that we have. There's nothing that he can't handle. We could have the worst story ever, and he would still be there, ready and willing to just embrace us with everything he has. And I just think it's beautiful how Les Mis is able to kind of parallel that, even if it's not intentional.
And I'd like to clarify and say that I don't necessarily think it's a bad movie overall. I think the acting performances are fine, I think Anne Hathaway even won an Oscar for it, I think.
Yeah,
I
she
need to
did.
fact check that. The acting is good. It's more the singing and the lack of vocal technique that I have issues with.
Yeah, I think on the note of the tone of the movie and the message is pretty much wrapped up in Ephesians 4:32. Be kind to one another, compassionate, forgiving each other, just as God in Christ has also forgiven you. That is shown from the priest to Valjean. Well, Valjean has been told, being in prison, that he's worthless for stealing a loaf of bread and has suffered this whole time because of his crime, quote unquote. And the priest gives him all this grace and telling him there's a better life and not condemning him. One, for a stupid crime, but that's just how France was. But Valjean and Javert are the epitome of the villain saying, you're just like me, you just won't take the step of what you need to do. That whole monologue thing that happens with villains versus heroes. But
well, I think it's
the difference,
really quick. One second. In the song, the confrontation, it's really hard. I want to interject before we get too far. In the song, the confrontation, it's really hard to understand the lyrics because Valjean and Javert are talking over each other or singing over each other because it's musical. And there's one part where he literally says, like, I was born in darkness, like Bane does from the Batman movie. And I'd like to think that Christopher Nolan, when writing that dialogue, maybe referenced the dynamic of these two characters, but that's probably just something I like to imagine. Yeah. It's probably not true.
But no, it's the epitome of they're both on the same path, but what do they do with that? Javert continues in anger and hatred towards Valjean. And Javert, when shown grace, just doesn't know what to do with himself. He's like, people, justice should be served, and wanting the law to play out, and even if French law back then was dumb, he's like, this is how it should be, and can't comprehend being gracious to someone. And then Valjean, when shown grace, just melts and is like, what is this? And decides that he needs to be giving that to others as well. And that's when he becomes a better man, a wealthy man, and shows that grace to everyone. And maybe not equally, because he was still human, but what he did with that is very telling and showing of what the story really is.
Yeah. It really does show, like, what goes around comes around. Like, it all started from the priest showing grace, and then that pushed Valjean to show grace to other people. Like, he saw what grace can be in. I just think it's awesome that he was able to use that as, like, almost motivation throughout the rest of the movie to just give grace.
And what goes around comes around, even down to, like, the candlesticks. Like, that's a physical representation where he didn't even use them. He still had them at the very end, just as a reminder, and then eventually to help Cosette. And that, man, wow.
Oh, that was beautiful.
That's another part of the story that I think the musical touches on it, but again, it goes into, it's much clearer in the books and the audio drama, is that not only does the bishop show Valjean grace the first time by just letting an ex-convict into his house, which you did not do at that point, by letting him stay in his house and trusting him, but then Valjean tries to steal the silverware and run away, and the guards bring him back. And they're like, this guy stole from you, to the bishop. And the bishop was like, oh no, I gave him these, but you forgot the candlesticks as well. So he's giving him grace upon grace and showing him, like, not only just backing up his story, which he actually is lying. He did steal the silverware, but then he's like, oh, but you forgot this extra thing that I'm giving you now. And not only does that get him out of the clutches of the law this time, but that's really the action that spurs Valjean on become this new person that he decides to become. And again, just once again, another amazing gospel analogy of, like, not only did God save us from the situation we were in, but then he gives us his spirit so that we can be truly changed, leave that life behind, and become something totally new. Pretty cool.
Bars.
This whole talk is reminded me of a movie. Have you guys seen Count of Monte Cristo? Well, have you actually?
I haven't seen it, but I read the book in high school.
Believe it or not, I have also read the book.
Whoa!
Guys! Mic drop, right? Yeah, that's not usually something Josh does. But I think that's another one that we should talk on, because Les Mis and Count of Monte Cristo have, like, a lot of similarities as far as themes go, at least. And I think it'd be another good one to kind of have this sort of talk with. And Annika, I feel like you might enjoy that if you were to watch the movie as well as reading the book. I think it'd be a lot of good input.
Yeah, I mean,
the movie's really old, isn't it? Oh, it's 2002. Who's in it?
It's older than me.
It's got Jim Caviezel in it.
It does.
And Henry Cavill.
It's a great movie. It's a great movie.
Dang. Jesus and Superman teaming up.
Annika's really on board now. Annika's really on board.
Don't ask Kendra how much I love Henry Cavill.
Yeah.
Don't get me started. He's a nerd too. He plays video games.
I were just talking about how it was so frustrating how he got snubbed with both Superman and The Witcher recently. But he's going to be in Argyle, and I'm so stoked to see Argyle. I think next week is when it comes out, and probably, well, it would be this week by the time everyone's listening to it. But Argyle is one of those, like, it feels like it's an original story. Maybe I'm wrong, but it looks like a lot of fun. Anyways,
I remember distinctly one time when I was reading the book. It's been a long time, so the real nerds might come for me. But if I remember correctly, Marius like comes and sneaks up to meet Cosette, like in her garden, and at some point she figures it out or something, or she knows that he's gonna come see her, and there's a line that's like, she put on her dress that looked like it had received, or like the tailor had cut off a little too much, and so she's like purposefully being like, oh, he's coming to see me. It's something like that. And I remember just laughing because I thought it was a very like old-timey way of saying she put on her low-cut top. Like, that was my favorite part. The dress that had received a little too many strokes of the scissors, or something like that.
That's funny. That's funny.
That's funny. That's good.
Another thing that again, if I remember correctly, Victor Hugo came to Christ while writing Les Mis. And I think it was one of those stories where he kind of set out to write an anti-gospel story, or sort of like really a total opposite of what Les Mis ended up being. But as he wrote, he was discovering the truth and the beauty. I'm looking it up right now to make sure I'm right, because I feel like I remember that was the stories that he started out writing it as being a very bleak, sort of realistic view of the world, and then as he discovered Jesus, he sort of discovered the gospel and then wrote the gospel into the story.
Wow. I believe it. If you didn't have to prove it, I would probably believe it, because it's just so gospel centered.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a very compelling story too. Like, I can't imagine that he was writing it and didn't think that, ooh, this is gonna be a good one. You know, I feel like he had to be thinking while he was working on it that this is powerful. You know.
Yeah, and I think even with this story, it's a little more blunt, but it's very obvious that the story is one that's so attractive, and we love it so much because of the redemption, because of the grace aspect of it, because that's what actually happened. Jesus showed us grace, and grace on top of grace, to the point of dying for us on the cross, and that was his ultimate sacrifice play. Valjean didn't sacrifice himself in death, but he sacrificed everything for the people he loved, or risked it at least. And that amount of grace that we really don't, we're embarrassed to be like, man, I don't show that much. I don't give away all my money to the person who's down on their luck in sex work. Like, we're not that gracious to give all that stuff. So it's compelling for us to maybe be that type of gracious, to be that reflection of Christ, but also it's attractive because of this God-sized hole that we have in our heart that can only be filled by God, and it's partially filled with the truth of the story, even though the story itself is still fictional, but the truth of the story is still the gospel.
Well, and also, again, another thing that I think the musical sort of blazes over is that it is saving Marius from the sewers, ends up killing Valjean because he gets an infection from all of the grossness down there. And then he also leaves Cosette, like he basically cuts her off because he knows, I think, if I remember correctly, again, it's been a very long time, he doesn't know for a while that Javert killed himself, so he thinks Javert is still out there and that he's coming for him. So he basically cuts Cosette off and lets her be with Marius, because he doesn't want her life to be ruined if the law comes and catches up to him. So he basically cuts her off and removes himself from her life. And, like, in the end, he doesn't die alone, but he lives many of his last days alone. He's trying to save her. And so in a way, he does end up making that ultimate sacrifice, even though it's more of a long-term thing than, like, I don't know, running in front of a bullet or a sword for someone.
Yeah. I'm curious what I think Annika probably already said it, and maybe this is just a question for Annika because she knows all of them and Josh only knows one of them. What's the favorite song from whatever version? And Annika obviously has the most scope of it, but yeah. Josh, what is your favorite song, at least from the soundtrack, regardless of, I mean, you only have the movie? I
am a strong believer in Bring Him Home. I think it's beautiful, and I think it's the best song there because in the movie. Then again, Annika, you did just show us who was it that sang that song?
Norm Lewis.
Norm Lewis. He cooked Put it in modern terms.
As the kids
For a lack
say.
of a better word. I've been in college way too much. He nailed it, and he was beautiful, but I still really do enjoy Hugh Jackman's performance for Bring Him Home because there's a lot of emotion there, and I think if I listen to the song, which doesn't happen very often because I've got to be in a very specific mood for it, but I will be thinking of that part of the story and just how amazing the story is in that song, too. And I think it ties it in really well, too.
Yeah, I think for me, it would definitely be Cole Wilkinson singing Bring Him Home and Carrie Hope Fletcher singing I Dreamed a Dream. It's just absolutely stunning renditions of both of those songs. And it just, yeah, there's few things better out there. But I think overall, one of my favorite songs is Valjean's soliloquy that he sings at the beginning. It's kind of the first big turning point, and some of the lyrics in that song are just so poignant. And I think that song in particular is the clearest way that the writers of the music sort of adapted the heart of the story into the music. And there's a lot of lyrics about redemption, and the very last line is Jean Valjean is nothing now, another story must begin. And most adaptations, they have him tearing up his yellow passport, which is what designated him as an ex-convict. And that's really the song that kicks off the story, and we start getting into the heart of the story. And I just think that it's the best song that takes that gospel story, puts it into song form, shows the inner turmoil of I don't deserve this mercy and this second chance, but yet I have it. What do I do now? And it's an incredible song. The music is so well written.
Man, there's so many good ones. It's a really well written musical, regardless of which one you listen to. Just
Since it's all a song, you could just say Les Mis. Just Les Mis is your favorite song.
The whole thing.
It's technically an operetta.
I like, do you hear the people sing for the marching all together now? Just tally ho, everybody. That's not my favorite.
A
but
huge
it's got
Marvel nerd would say that. It's like the Avengers Assemble of Les Mis,
Assemble.
is it
Yeah,
not?
it is.
Well,
That and
actually,
One Day More. I would
I was gonna
argue
say
One Day More is the best Act 1 finale song that has ever been written for any musical that I've ever heard.
I would agree with you, but only because I haven't listened to many Act 1 finales. So I trust you more on that. But I definitely love One Day More. And I think we talked about... Oh, no, it was because William had it in his soundtrack episode. And I don't know if I played the right version. I'm sorry. But the One Day More just is so grand, and everyone together. And it's the... Where is everybody at in the story? That's a really good part of it. Catching everyone up. It's well written. It all blends together, even though there's 10 different parts singing or whatever, all culminating in the grand final note that just, you can't help but applause every time, as long as it's done well, of course. But yeah, and then I sang Empty Chairs at Empty Tables for a cabaret that we did a while ago, and that one is not my favorite, but I still like it because it was my song for a while. And then Stars, actually Will sang Stars for that same cabaret. Wasn't as good as Norm Lewis. Sorry, Will. I know you like that one, but Norm Lewis, he's got a couple years on you, a little bit more experience.
He's probably been, singing since he was 2. He's I don't even know how old he is. He's probably older than he was in that video. But
yeah, all of these are really good. So I'm gonna just say One Day More is my favorite.
You're picking through gold. That's the thing, though.
Yeah.
There's only a couple of skips on any album that you listen to, and those for
What's
me
a
are
skip?
just more Master of the House makes me feel icky. Okay, Justice for Lovely Ladies. Okay, this is another issue I have with the movie. Lovely Ladies in the movie is almost too much, to the point where the sexuality of these women becomes the focus. Where the real point of the song is these women who are so desperate that they've fallen to such a low place. And I think in the movie, it kind of glorifies it and kind of glorifies this world, when really the point of the song is to show how horrible this society is for women, and how if you lose your job, you don't really have anything else. And so it's really, really a heartbreaking song, I think, when it's done well, even though it is more on the raunchy side. If it's done well, you sort of see this arc of these women who are putting up a front, and then at the end you see the brokenness and you see the sadness. And so Justice for Lovely Ladies is what I'm gonna say.
Yeah, that's good.
One thing that I didn't realize until looking at the cast list, the Thénardiers was Helena Bonham Carter and Sacha Baron Cohen. That is kind of turning over into satirical, where you know that they're going to be over the top. Thenardier is like that's what the characters are, is just greedy and gross and like makes you feel something, and like those two characters, I think those were good casts. Maybe not for me singing, but they fit the part.
I think they were two of the casting that I actually really enjoyed, just because the Thenardiers don't have to be good singers necessarily. I mean, obviously good vocal technique is gonna end up in a better song overall, but they have that sort of like, I don't know, just that quality that I think you need to play those characters. So I didn't have a problem with that casting at all. I thought they were great.
Yeah, I also didn't realize. I mean, obviously there's the big name: Hugh Jackman, Anne Hathaway, Eddie Raymond, Russell Crowe. I know Amanda Seyfried is a big name, but I just didn't realize that she was Cosette, which is, I mean, yeah, skilled. And she was the Mamma Mia girl, right? Mm-hmm. I know some people don't like that I'm calling her the Mamma Mia girl, but
one of my roommates just came in. Seth, you know him, Ethan. He came in with a kazoo and started playing Careless Whisper on the kazoo to me.
Wow, that's something.
He is a character. He's a lot. I love the guy so much. I'll ask him if I can go to the dining hall with him, just because it's so much fun. After like 8:30, his ADHD meds wear off, and that's when stuff kicks in. So, okay, quick story. I asked him if he wants to go get food, and yesterday he didn't take his ADHD pills at all.
Oh,
so
no.
Just all day we're getting raw, unfiltered Ethan, and it was. We go to the rot. It's like 4:00, and he grabs his bathrobe naturally, his walking stick, his slippers, because it's the dining hall. We don't need to dress up. And on the way, he finds a towel that's just on the side. He puts it over his head, and then he starts walking around up to people. He's like, "Hi, would you spare some calories for the poor?" And once they say no, he just walks away. But he doesn't walk away normally. That's what's crazy.
Social anxiety is afraid of him.
He is social anxiety. He's the giver of social anxiety. It's amazing. I absolutely love him.
Okay. Josh, be ready to have your mind blown again.
I'm turning my headset up.
God on high, hear my prayer. In my need, you
And then there's another 20 seconds of applause.
That
I don't know
is
if that's
vocal technique at its finest.
God.
Like, you do not understand how difficult that song is. And to nail it like that is astonishing. It's really
Like,
crazy.
even, Annika, you can know musical technique, but especially even for a guy who sings tenor, I know that switching between tenor and chest voice that quickly, at least for me, is very difficult. And I'm sure with a higher range song and a higher, status song like that, like that's even more difficult. So very impressive. And just holding that note, I know that I struggle at holding long notes consistently without shaking. So man, it's just top tier. I understand.
I was just thinking, breathe. Come on, man. Breathe.
They don't
You
do
need
that.
Air.
Broadway
It's
people
insane.
don't do that.
The control that people like that have over their voices is absolutely insane. And I think that that's obviously, again, I understand that studios need to hire big names in order to sell tickets to musicals. Like, there's even this whole discourse going online right now about the Mean Girls movie and Willy Wonka and how they kind of hid the fact that those movies were musicals. And because musical movies don't tend to sell well, like Greatest Showman was really kind of an exception, and Les Mis was kind of an exception because it had so many big names. So I understand the necessity of needing to hire big names, but honestly, if anyone is interested in just hearing the beauty of the music of Les Mis, I think there's plenty of concert versions up on YouTube for free or for very cheap that they have choirs of hundreds of people singing the background vocals, and then they have these casts of incredible performers, and you can just put it on, you can just listen to almost 3 hours of just flawless music and flawless performances. So highly recommend looking up pretty much any of the anniversary casts except for the one with Nick Jonas playing Mary's, because
I think I know what Josh is going to be doing for a while now that he's introduced to this.
Guys, I thought Les Mis was good. I thought the movie was good. But now Annika's telling me that I'm only like 4 shovelfuls deep into a friggin' mine. I gotta get caught up. There's so much stuff I need to catch up on.
Annika, the real question is, have you seen the 1935 Les Mis? I'm just seeing it here on YouTube.
Movie?
It says it says Les Miserables 1935. I didn't know it existed.
Like
I doubt it's a musical because I don't know that musicals were really a thing in the 30s. Tell me I'm wrong, but
yeah,
at least
it's
not
an
to the
old
extent that they are
musical.
now.
I don't know exactly when it was written, but it definitely isn't that old. I think it was originally written in another language.
I guess French.
There's a clip
And then
here.
it was translated into English. I mean, it's been around for a long, long time.
It looks like
musical.
a 30s movie. Like I can see it just gives you the first two and a half minutes of the movie, and you can see Valjean is basically he's in a jail cell that has bars about this wide apart, so he's sticking his body out from the bars that are about here, which you could easily slide through this way. So it's not meant to be realistic. It's the 30s. They didn't really know what they were doing. But I was just curious. Well, apparently there are way better versions to listen to than the movie. I'm sorry if you like the movie, especially you, Josh. Apparently it's not that good.
I feel like I'm the one who needs to give out an apology because I just didn't know I was missing out on just amazing performances like that.
Yeah.
Well,
no, it's
okay,
fine.
here's the
Proof
thing.
that
I
not everything
know
is a movie.
you like to link resources and stuff in your bio.
Yeah.
I believe Sideways has a video or a video essay on Les Mis and why the music is not as good as it could have been. And it's a really good video. So if you want to link that, just to sort of explain more in depth and with more of a better understanding of music theory than I'm able to provide, that video is a really, really great resource. I think it's Sideways. Either that or it's Schaeferless, but I don't know.
I'm sure Schaeferless probably has one as well, but it says I've watched the Sideways one. So yeah, thank you guys for joining me for this episode. I really liked it. I think there's a lot to take away from this story, and man, is it deep. So with that said, thank you guys for listening. Make sure you join our Discord, follow our socials, and listen every week because we'll have another one coming out next week for this foreseeable future. Thanks for listening. Have a great rest of your week. Know that you're loved. God bless.
Peace out, brethren.
Bye.
Oh, Josh. Not the green screen. No.